Have you ever felt like you're giving everything you have, and yet no one truly sees how much you're doing? As if your sleepless nights, your exhausted body, and your dedication were never enough for the world to recognize who you are. That was the life of Hannah Collins. Young, talented, with a discipline many admired from afar but few truly understood. To most, she was just another determined lawyer, someone who always seemed in control. But behind the perfectly tied dark hair, behind the steady heels echoing through the firm's hallways, there was an exhausted woman. Every morning started the same way. The alarm ringing too early, the mirror reflecting a face trying to cover up fatigue with makeup, and the strong coffee that no longer had any effect. The apartment where she lived was far too quiet, lit only by the constant glow of her laptop screen, often still on when dawn arrived. Hannah carried within herself a dream, to earn respect, to be recognized for her talent and strength. But to get there, it seemed she had to pay too high a price. The weight of impossible deadlines, demanding clients, and a routine that crushed even the briefest moments of rest. But it wasn't just the work that drained her. There was also Ethan. To her colleagues, Ethan Murphy was the charming son of one of the firm's partners. A man who walked into any room with a rehearsed smile and perfectly timed comments, as if life were always a stage. For Hannah, at first, he had been something else. A safe harbor, someone who made her believe she wasn't invisible in a world that ignored her. Only, over time, that safe harbor turned into a silent prison. Their relationship was hidden, kept in the shadows, sustained by promises that always seemed to be postponed. Ethan said it was for her own good, that if people knew, they might think she was advancing in her career because of him. And she accepted it. Accepted because she believed that, at some point, everything would change. That once she was finally recognized, they could live their love openly. In the meantime, Hannah carried not only her own responsibilities, but often his as well. She stayed late, finishing reports that weren't hers, putting out fires she hadn't caused, and in the end, received only a rushed thank you, if even that. Deep down, she wondered if she was fighting for the partnership, or just for him. Still, Hannah pressed on. She put on her tailored suit, took a deep breath, and walked into the office as if nothing could shake her. The world didn't need to see her doubts, nor her weaknesses. The world could only see the perfect version she forced herself to maintain. But something inside her was starting to scream. A part of her that was tired of waiting, tired of believing in empty promises. A part that wanted to be seen, not just used. And it was in that state of exhaustion, in that mixture of strength and fragility, that Hannah began that seemingly ordinary day. A day that, to anyone else, didn't look like it would be anything special. The city's chaotic traffic, phones ringing endlessly, the pile of files that never seemed to shrink. Just another day in which she would smile to hide her fatigue and tell herself it was worth it. But sometimes, it's precisely on days like that, apparently ordinary, that something shifts. And Hannah didn't know it yet, but her life was about to follow an unexpected path. One that would force her to choose between clinging to everything she had always believed, or finally opening her eyes to something that could transform her story forever. Because, deep down, no matter how much she tried to control everything, Hannah was about to discover that life doesn't follow perfect scripts. It surprises. It shakes us. It places people in our path when we least expect it. And that would be the first step of a journey that would change everything. Hannah Collins was the kind of person everyone thought had her life under control. Always punctual, organized, efficient. To her colleagues, she was the lawyer who never failed. But no one saw how much it cost her to sustain that image. From a young age, Hannah had learned that if she wanted respect, she would have to work twice as hard as anyone else. Her father always said the world gave nothing for free, and in a way, that phrase became the fuel of her life. That's why she threw herself into her work, as if every case were a test of her worth. The law firm where she worked was imposing, with glass walls reflecting the city in motion. Hannah, however, rarely had time to admire the view. Her days were filled with suffocating deadlines, endless arguments, and legal strategies that became her routine. Her heart raced at every meeting, with every evaluating glance from the partners who would decide her future. But what almost no one knew was that behind all that effort there was someone draining her energy. Ethan Murphy, the boyfriend she kept secret. Ethan was attractive, confident, always with a joke at the ready. To others, he was simply the son of the powerful Murphy, one of the firm's owners. To Hannah, at first, he had been a charm. He seemed to believe in her when no one else did, and that was what made her fall. But over time, reality began to weigh on her. The relationship had to remain hidden, to protect her reputation, as he said. And Hannah, who believed that one day things would be different, kept accepting it. She accepted when Ethan asked her to review a report for him because he was too tired. She accepted when he used her ideas in meetings without giving her credit. She even accepted when he walked beside her in the hallways and treated her like just another colleague. Ethan said it was only a matter of time. That when she was recognized as partner, no one would doubt her. But on lonely nights, as she finished endless reports, Hannah asked herself whether she was fighting for her career or just for him. It was Sarah Mitchell, her best friend, who first dared to say out loud what Hannah already felt. Sarah was Hannah's opposite, spontaneous, funny, always with a sharp comment on her lips. They had met in college, and since then, Sarah had become like a sister. "You know, he's just using you, right?" Sarah said one evening, as they shared a cold pizza in Hannah's small apartment. Hannah sighed, adjusting the reading glasses she wore at home. "He loves me, Sarah. He just can't show it right now." Loving in secret isn't loving, Hannah. Sarah looked at her firmly. You deserve someone who wants to be by your side, not hidden behind curtains. Those words echoed in Hannah's mind, more times than she cared to admit. But whenever she thought of confronting Ethan, she remembered his eyes. The whispered promises in the rare moments they were alone, and convinced herself to wait a little longer. Deep down, she clung to the hope that someday all of this would make sense. That one day, she could finally walk hand in hand with him without fear. In the meantime, Hannah remained immersed in work. Each victory in court was a small spark of pride. Each compliment from the partners was a drop of fuel to keep going. Still, the emptiness persisted, as if, despite all her achievements, something was always missing. At times, alone at her desk, lit only by the computer screen, she wondered if this was really the path she wanted to take. But she quickly pushed the thoughts aside. There was no time for doubts. She had to keep going. And so, Hannah's life was divided between two worlds, the professional one, where she fought to be recognized, and the personal one, where she clung to a love that could never be seen. Two worlds that seemed to run side by side, but were about to collide in a way that would change everything. And that week, when she received the news that she would be assigned to an important case, Hannah believed that maybe this was the moment she could finally prove to everyone, and to herself, that she was worthy. What she didn't imagine was that this case, apparently just another challenge on her endless list, would be the starting point for something much bigger. Something that would make her question not only her career, but also the love she so firmly believed in. Because sometimes life chooses the most unexpected moments to put us face to face with what we really need to see. And for Hannah, that moment was only just beginning. That morning seemed like so many others. Heavy traffic, the sound of honking horns, the leather briefcase pressed against her body as Hannah rushed not to miss the first meeting of the day. The firm was buzzing, as always. Phones ringing nonstop, assistants balancing piles of papers, lawyers debating deadlines in narrow hallways. It was the place where she spent most of her life and where she learned, day after day, how to survive. Inside the conference room, the partners were already gathered. Hannah straightened her posture, took a deep breath, and walked in. trying to hide her nerves behind the serene expression she had mastered. Across the table, Ethan was already seated. He greeted her with a discreet nod, as if they were nothing more than colleagues. That rehearsed gesture always stabbed at her, but she swallowed the pain in silence. That's when she heard the name that would change everything, Walker. "We've got a new opponent in the case against the private clinic," said one of the partners, flipping through documents. "Daniel Walker? Has anyone here gone up against him before?" One of the older attorneys chuckled. "Walker's sharp, young, but ruthless. He's got a reputation for leaving no loose ends." Hannah scribbled the name down, though it was already engraved in her mind. Walker. Just another detail in a sea of worries. Hours later, seeking a pause from the chaos, she stepped into her usual coffee shop. The place had become a kind of refuge. The aroma of freshly ground beans, the muffled sound of conversations, the warmth that contrasted with the chilly wind outside. It was there, amidst the everyday noise, that had happened. "You again." The voice was familiar, laced with subtle humor. Hannah looked up and recognized him instantly. The man who had helped her pick up her scattered papers days ago. He was leaning against the counter, a cup in his hand and a faint smile, as if her presence was the most natural thing in the world. "Looks like the city isn't so big after all," Hannah replied, trying to sound neutral. He extended his hand, as though they were meeting for the first time. "Daniel." For a second, she froze. The name echoed inside her, colliding with the memory of that morning's meeting. Daniel Walker. The same opponent she would soon have to face. "Hannah," she said at last, quickly taking his hand. That simple exchange of names carried an invisible weight. She didn't know it yet, but here was the beginning of a conflict that would extend far beyond the courtroom. "Can I buy you a coffee?" he asked, casually. She hesitated. Accepting felt dangerous, even if it was just a cup of coffee. But something in his gaze disarmed her. There was sincerity there, a kind of interest she wasn't used to. Not the look of someone expecting something in return, just human. They sat by a window. The morning light filtered through the glass, outlining Daniel's firm features. He spoke calmly, as if he had all the time in the world, something rare in the world Hannah knew. He told a few stories about past cases, always with a touch of humor. Against her will, Hannah found herself smiling. For a moment, she forgot the deadlines, forgot Ethan, forgot even who he was professionally. There was a lightness in that conversation that had been missing in her life. But the reminder came quickly. He was Walker, the man who would be seated across from her, ready to dismantle her every argument. She couldn't afford to relax. Gathering her bag, she stood with forced composure. "It was nice seeing you, Daniel, but I need to get back to work." He studied her with an enigmatic look, as though he understood more than she was saying. "Of course. Until next time, Hannah." As she left the cafe, her heart was pounding. Something about all of it felt strange, out of place. But deep down, she knew this wouldn't be the last time they crossed paths. And somehow, the feeling was that her life was about to get far more complicated. The following Monday, the office felt heavier than usual. The air conditioning hummed coldly. The white lights reflected off the stacks of papers spread across desks, and the ringing phones never seemed to stop. Hannah had arrived early, yet a pile of memos was already waiting for her. She took a deep breath and tried to convince herself it was just another ordinary week. But it wasn't. The case had been officially assigned, and to her surprise, she was in charge of it. When she heard her name mentioned by the partners in the meeting, Hannah's heart leaped. This was the opportunity she had been waiting for years. A high-profile case, the kind that could define her career. The only detail that turned the victory into a burden. The attorney on the other side was Daniel Walker. During the first strategy meeting, Ethan sat there as if he belonged at the head of the table. Hannah knew he hadn't done half of the preparatory work, but he carried himself as though he were indispensable. She, meanwhile, held her composure, even as the credit for her effort seemed to slide from her hands to his. "We need an aggressive approach," one of the partners said, tapping his pen against the table. "The hospital won't back down, and we can't afford to look weak." Hannah nodded slightly, though inside she knew that posture could backfire. Their opponent was respected, skillful, and, above all, strategic. Daniel wasn't the type to be intimidated by direct attacks. In the days that followed, she drowned herself in an even more suffocating routine. Hours of reading documents, depositions, legal precedents. Every detail had to be mapped, every argument calculated. There were nights when she lost track of time completely, until the first light of dawn crept into her apartment. It was during one of those long nights, her tired eyes fixed on the glowing screen, that she received a message from Ethan. "Don't worry, I'll handle everything in tomorrow's meeting." Hannah let out a bitter laugh. It was always like that. He showed up at the last minute, took the credit, and she remained invisible. Still, part of her clung to the idea that if she reached partnership at the firm, all of it would be worth it. At the next meeting, Ethan did speak. With conviction, he presented arguments Hannah had prepared entirely on her own. She sat in silence, her expression impassive, though her heart twisted inside her chest. When the senior partner praised the clarity of the presentation, Ethan just smiled, as if it were solely his merit. After the meeting, Sarah stopped by her office, holding 2 coffees. "You need either a miracle or a vacation," she said, handing her the cup. "And since I can't give you a vacation, here's caffeine." Hannah sighed, resting her head in her hands. "Sometimes I wonder if any of this makes sense." "It does," Sarah replied, settling into the chair across from her. "Just not the way you're living it. Hannah, you're carrying the weight of 2 people, and only one of them is you." Her friend's words lingered in her mind. But before she could respond, she received a notification. A new hearing scheduled. Her heart skipped a beat. It would be the first time she would face Daniel Walker directly in court. The following days were consumed by preparation. With every document she reviewed and every deposition she revisited, the pressure mounted on her shoulders. And yet, in the back of her mind, there lingered the memory of that cafe, of Daniel's natural way of speaking, of the faint smile that seemed so different from the ruthless reputation others described. The night before the hearing, sleep was impossible. Hours passed slowly, filled with scribbled notes and half-drunk cups of coffee. By 5 in the morning, Hannah, dressed in her most sober suit, pulled her hair into a tight bun, as if her appearance could shield her from the nerves. The courthouse had its own gravity. High walls, silence broken only by murmurs and hurried footsteps, the dense air of a place where decisions could alter lives. Hannah sat, eyes fixed on her files, when she sensed movement nearby. It was him, Daniel. Walking with confidence, exchanging brief greetings, then taking his place across the room. For an instant, their eyes met. No words were spoken, but that fleeting exchange said more than any phrase could. Hannah quickly looked away, her heart pounding. At that moment, she realized something she didn't want to admit. No matter how much she had prepared, she wasn't ready. Not to face just illegal rival, but someone who, in some inexplicable way, had already begun to stir feelings she had locked away for far too long. And from then on, nothing would be simple. The invitation arrived, tucked among a pile of paperwork on Hannah's desk. A white envelope, elegant, with golden lettering that shimmered under the lamplight. It was from Becca, an old friend from law school, now preparing to marry Rob, her longtime boyfriend. Hannah let out a sigh as she opened it. Part of her felt a strange relief. Maybe that weekend would be the pause she so desperately needed. A breath between cases, deadlines, and the suffocating pressure of the firm. Yet another part of her knew she could never truly disconnect. Work clung to her like a shadow, always present, even in moments meant to be light. Sarah, of course, was ecstatic when she heard about the wedding. Finally, an excuse to wear a decent dress and ditch those boring suits, she teased while rummaging through Hannah's closet for something suitable. And who knows, maybe you'll even have some fun. I don't know if I can, Hannah answered hesitantly. There's so much piled up. There always is. Sarah gave her a firm look. But Hannah, life can't just be deadlines and reports. You have to live, too. Deep down, Hannah knew her friend was right. So, with a tired smile, she agreed. Days later, there they were, on their way to the resort where the ceremony would be held. The venue was breathtaking. A hotel by the sea, with manicured gardens, white flowers decorating every corner, and a gentle breeze carrying the scent of salt and freedom. The sound of waves blended with the laughter of guests gathering for the pre-wedding events. For Becca, nothing could be left to chance. She was organized, perfectionist, and had planned every detail of the celebration with military precision. Dresses rehearsed, schedules printed, even the music playlist was set. This wedding is going to be perfect, Becca declared, her eyes glowing as she showed the bridesmaids the detailed program. Hannah smiled, though a knot tightened in her chest. The contrast was sharp. Here was a friend who seemed to have found balance between love and fulfillment, while Hannah herself could barely breathe under the weight of her own choices. Ethan, of course, would also be there. The very thought made her uneasy. He seemed more excited about the chance to show up in a social setting than about accompanying her. On the first night, during the welcome dinner, Hannah sat quietly, watching the couples dance beneath golden lights strung across the ceiling. Laughter, clinking glasses, promises of love celebrated in every gesture. And she, sitting next to Ethan, who barely looked up from his phone. Could you, for 1 minute, put the phone away? She whispered, trying not to draw attention. He looked up, annoyed. I'm handling something important. You know how it is, Hannah sighed, turning her gaze away. Deep down, she knew nothing would change. Ethan would always have an excuse. There would always be something more important than her. Meanwhile, Sarah threw herself into the evening, laughing with other guests and tugging Hannah by the hand. Come on, just one dance, she urged. Hannah let herself be pulled in. The music wrapped around her senses, the soft fabric of her dress moving as she spun. For a moment, she forgot everything else. Almost believed she could simply exist, without thinking about the future. But then, her eyes caught on something unexpected. At the far end of the room, in the midst of conversations and glasses of wine, he was there. The same steady gaze, the same striking presence. Daniel Walker. Hannah's heart raced. It was as if two worlds collided before her eyes, the professional and the personal. The drive to win in court, and the strange feeling of finally being seen. Daniel looked up and recognized her. He didn't smile, but the way he observed her made her lose her footing in the dance. She drew a sharp breath, trying to regain her balance. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not during a weekend meant to celebrate someone else's love. Yet deep down, she knew. His presence wasn't a coincidence. And Becca's perfect wedding was about to become the stage for something far more complicated. The next morning, the sun reflected off the resort's windows, and the gentle sound of waves seemed to announce a calm day. But Hannah couldn't relax. She had spent the night replaying the scene from the dinner, the fleeting glance exchanged with Daniel. It was impossible to ignore. He was there, in the same place, and that meant somehow their lives were even more entangled than she had imagined. At breakfast, Becca was in her element, buzzing with energy as she orchestrated every detail. Remember, ladies, at 3 o'clock, we have the dress fitting, and right after that, the photo session in the garden. She spoke like a film producer, passing out printed schedules. Sarah, sitting beside Hannah, rolled her eyes. Is she a bride or a general? She whispered, making Hannah stifle a tired smile. They served themselves and found a table in the corner. But as soon as Hannah sat down, she felt that familiar weight of being watched. She looked up, and across the room, Daniel sat with a cup of coffee in his hand, talking to another guest, but clearly paying attention to her. It wasn't an arrogant stare, nor one meant to provoke. It was curious, almost respectful, as if he were trying to read her. Hannah quickly looked down, stirring her coffee though it didn't need it. Later, during the rehearsal, fate played its cruel irony once again. The organizers paired up the bridesmaids and groomsmen to walk down the aisle. And, as if planned by some mischievous force, Hannah was matched with Daniel. Her heart skipped. Her palms grew clammy, and she tried to mask her discomfort with a polite smile. "Looks like we'll be walking together," he said softly, almost conspiratorially. Hannah just nodded, avoiding his gaze for long. The closeness unsettled her. The light brush of his hand on hers as he guided her down the aisle sent shivers through her body, though she tried to remain composed. "Nervous?" he asked, noticing her stiffness, a faint smile on his lips. "Just focused," she replied quietly. "Well then, relax." His tone was calm, almost reassuring. "After all, you're not the one getting married." Hannah bit her lip, suppressing a sharp retort. There was something irritating about his ease, and yet, she couldn't deny the effect it had on her. That evening, at dinner, it happened again. Daniel was always nearby, mingling with different groups, yet somehow his eyes kept finding hers. It wasn't invasive, but it was steady, leaving her unsettled. Ethan, meanwhile, seemed even more detached. He spent more time on work calls or chatting with colleagues than with Hannah. When he was around, his conversations revolved around himself, rarely asking how she felt. Sarah, as observant as ever, caught on immediately. "I saw the way he looks at you," she murmured as they strolled through the lantern-lit garden. "Who?" Hannah tried to deflect, but her voice betrayed her. "Don't play dumb. The lawyer, Daniel." Sarah stopped, fixing her with a pointed look. "Hannah, it's like he sees something in you that you've forgotten how to show the world." Hannah sighed, unable to deny it, but she also couldn't accept it. "He's my rival, Sarah. I shouldn't." "Rival in court," Sarah shot back. "But outside of it, you're not just a lawyer, you're a woman. A woman who deserves to be seen." Those words echoed in Hannah's mind the rest of the night. Back in her room, she lay in bed staring at the ceiling, remembering every detail, the handshake, the faint smile, the way he seemed to listen even when she wasn't speaking. Deep down, she knew she was on the edge of something dangerous. But, for the first time in a long while, she felt alive. The next day, during the welcome party on the beach, fate intervened again. Hannah wandered barefoot along the sand, her steps sinking softly, when a voice came from behind. "I told you we'd see each other again." It was Daniel, hands in his pockets, his gaze steady. She turned, trying to compose herself. "Looks like the world's too small. Or big enough that meetings like this aren't just coincidence." He stepped closer, not invading her space, but making it clear he was there to stay. Hannah's heart pounded. The waves crashed in the background, the cool breeze brushed her face, and in that moment she realized, no matter how much she tried to resist, there was something between them she could no longer ignore. And Becca's perfect wedding was fast becoming the stage for attention no one else seemed to notice except the two of them. The hall glowed under hundreds of delicate lights, reflected in crystal glasses and the shimmer of elegant dresses. Music filled the air, blending with the laughter of guests. It was the reception Becca had dreamed of, flawless, grand, like something out of a fairy tale. Hannah tried to let herself be carried by the festive atmosphere, but her heart was restless. From the beginning of the evening, Ethan had been even more distant than usual. He hadn't danced with her, hadn't asked if she was all right, and barely remembered to introduce her to the colleagues he chatted with so eagerly. It was as if she were there, just to occupy the space beside him, nothing more. Sarah, sensing the tension, tried to distract her. "You need to relax," she said, pulling her by the hand toward the dance floor. "Just one song." Hannah smiled faintly, and gave in. The melody was soft, and for a moment, her thoughts drifted away. But as the music ended, her eyes wandered across the hall. And then her heart froze. In the corner, half hidden behind a column, Ethan leaned in far too close to a young guest. He was laughing, his face inches from hers. His hand rested on the woman's arm in a way that was unmistakably intimate, as though he had forgotten entirely that Hannah was even in the room. Hannah's breath caught in her throat. For a second, she wondered if she was misinterpreting. Maybe it was just harmless conversation. But when she saw Ethan's fingers trailed down the woman's shoulder, with a familiarity he had never shown her in public, the illusion shattered. Sarah noticed Hannah's expression and followed her gaze. "Oh my God," she whispered, outraged. Hannah, he's openly flirting." The floor seemed to vanish beneath Hannah's feet. Her heart pounded so hard she could barely breathe. A lump rose in her throat, tears threatening to spill. But she refused to cry in front of everyone. With determined steps, she crossed the hall. Ethan only noticed her approach when she was standing right in front of him. "Can we talk?" Hannah asked, her voice low but firm. The guest quickly stepped back, embarrassed. Ethan tried to cover it with a smile. "Hannah, it's not what it looks like." She stared at him, her eyes glistening. "Then tell me, what does it look like to you? Because to me, it looks like I'm standing beside someone who doesn't have the courage to claim me as his own, but has no problem showing interest in anyone else." He drew in a breath, annoyed. "You're overreacting. It was just a conversation." "A conversation?" Hannah almost laughed, though her voice shook with hurt. "You've never managed to look at me like that in public. Never. But with her, in minutes, you forgot everything else." The eyes of nearby guests began to turn toward them, drawn by the rising tension. Becca, from across the room, watched with concern but didn't dare intervene. Ethan reached for Hannah's arm, but she pulled back. "Enough, Ethan. I'm tired of excuses, of promises that never come true. Tired of being invisible by your side." For a moment, silence hung in the air. And in that silence, Hannah felt the weight of every choice she had made. His face, now red with anger, was no longer the man she once thought she was fighting for. It was only the reflection of everything she had lost of herself. Without waiting for an answer, she turned and walked out of the hall. Tears finally fell freely as she crossed the lantern-lit garden. The cool night air rushed against her face, bringing with it a strange mix of pain and freedom. Deep down, she knew, something had broken forever. And as much as it hurt, perhaps, that break was exactly what she needed to finally see the truth. From a distance, someone watched her. Daniel, who had also witnessed part of the scene, remained silent. It wasn't the moment to approach, but in his gaze was a blend of respect and concern. He knew that night marked the beginning of an irreversible change in Hannah's life, and, somehow, in his too. The next morning, Hannah woke, with swollen eyes. She had cried herself to sleep, the party dress still draped over the armchair. The memories of the night before looping in her mind like a nightmare she couldn't escape. The humiliation, the pain, Ethan's attempt to brush it all off as a misunderstanding. But deep down, she knew, it wasn't the first time, and it certainly wouldn't be the last. As she got ready for breakfast with the group, every step felt heavy. The thought of facing questions, pitiful looks, or hushed whispers from guests who had surely noticed the scene made her stomach tighten. In the dining hall, Sarah was already waiting with a cup of coffee in hand. "You don't have to pretend you're okay," she said gently as Hannah sat down. Hannah dropped into the chair, resting her forehead in her palm. "I don't know how I managed to endure this for so long," Sarah sighed. "Because you believed in him." But believing in someone doesn't mean turning a blind eye to the truth. Before Hannah could respond, a calm, steady voice broke in behind her. "Good morning, Hannah." It was Daniel, impeccable as always, though his expression was more serious than usual. Hannah froze, her heart racing. The memory of the night before, mixed with his presence, made her uneasy. "Daniel," she murmured, struggling to find words. "What are you doing here?" He pulled out a chair and sat down without asking permission. "I don't mean to intrude, but I saw what happened last night. I just wanted to tell you that you don't deserve to be treated that way. Sarah crossed her arms, scrutinizing him. And what do you know about what she deserves? Daniel held her gaze steadily, enough to see that Hannah carries more than she should. Hannah shifted uncomfortably, wanting to end the conversation. I appreciate it, but I don't need your pity. He tilted his head slightly, a faint smile crossing his lips. It wasn't pity, just the truth. The words hung in the air. Hannah looked away, but inside she was conflicted. Something about his presence unsettled her in ways she couldn't name. Later, at the rehearsal, fate played its cruel game again. When the pairs were called, Hannah was once again placed beside Daniel. The inevitable contact, the touch of his hand on hers, the closeness it, all intensified the tension. As they walked down the aisle together, Hannah couldn't hold back anymore. You seem to be everywhere these days. Or maybe it's destiny, he replied casually. She gave a dry laugh. Destiny. I don't believe in that. Then call it coincidence, he countered, locking eyes with her. But something tells me it's more than that. His words stirred her more than she wanted to admit. Still, the true shock came that evening, during a private dinner for Rob's closest guests and groomsmen. That was when Hannah heard the truth that shook her to the core. Hannah, you have to meet someone, Rob said cheerfully, guiding her toward a table. An old family friend. And one of the best lawyers I know. Hannah froze as her eyes landed on the man in front of her. Daniel, composed and confident, greeted the group warmly. Daniel Walker, Rob introduced proudly. The attorney behind some of the biggest victories of the rival firm. The world seemed to stop. The name thundered in Hannah's mind. Walker. The same name the partners had brought up at the firm. The same man she was supposed to face in court. Do you two already know each other? Rob asked, noticing her reaction. Hannah swallowed hard. We've run into each other. Daniel's eyes stayed on her, no longer playful but heavy with unspoken truths. When the dinner ended, Hannah couldn't resist. She followed him into the garden, away from curious stares. So it's true, she said, her voice trembling. You're Daniel Walker. The attorney determined to crush me in court. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. Yes, but I never wanted you to find out like this. What did you expect? That I'd keep talking to you without realizing you're my opponent? She shot back, her voice sharp. Daniel met her eyes with quiet seriousness. What happens between us outside the courtroom doesn't have to affect what happens inside it. Hannah let out a bitter laugh. Outside the courtroom. Do you really think there's such a thing in my life? Silence fell between them, thick and heavy. She felt anger, but also a whirlwind of emotions she couldn't name. The pain of Ethan's betrayal, the confusion of Daniel's revelation, and a deep fear of losing the control she'd fought so hard to keep. I can't trust you, she finally whispered. Not after this. Daniel took a step closer, though he didn't touch her. Maybe not now. But Hannah, one day you'll realize I'm not your enemy. She turned quickly, her heart ablaze. In that moment, all she could think was how life seemed to mock her, throwing betrayal and confusion into the same path. And yet, somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered that Daniel might be right. The sky was heavy with dark clouds that night. The sea breeze, which during the day felt soft and refreshing, now carried a chill that seeped into the skin. Hannah wandered alone through the resort's garden, trying to breathe deeply, trying to convince herself she still had the strength to keep going. But every step weighed on her, as if her body carried the burden of years of exhaustion and heartbreak. She sat on a wooden bench facing the sea, the distant music of the party barely audible behind her. The muffled laughter of guests celebrating contrasted with the crash of waves on the shore. And there, for the first time in a long while, Hannah let the tears flow freely. Everything seemed to be collapsing. Her relationship with Ethan had revealed itself as a cruel lie, built on excuses and empty promises. And now, the only man who stirred something different in her heart was the very one she was destined to battle in court. Life seemed to mock her, stacking impossible contradictions at every turn. Hannah. The voice came softly, almost carried by the wind. She lifted her head quickly, wiping the tears with the back of her hand. Daniel stood a few steps away, his face serious, his eyes holding both restraint and concern. "You shouldn't be here," she said, her voice hoarse. "I need to be alone." He moved closer slowly, careful not to overstep. "I know. But I saw you leave like that, and I couldn't just stay put." She turned her gaze back to the waves. "You don't understand, Daniel. I've lost everything." "No." He sat beside her, keeping a respectful distance. "You haven't lost. You freed yourself." The word struck her like a blow. Freedom. She had never thought of it that way. To her, it all looked like ruins, failure. "You make it sound simple," she muttered, her voice trembling. "But it isn't." Ethan was everything I knew. And my work is all I have left. Daniel stayed silent for a moment, his eyes also on the dark horizon. "I used to think that way too," he finally said. "That my career was the only thing that defined me. But you know what I found out? That when we bury ourselves in work, it's usually because we're running from something." She turned to him, surprised by his honesty. "Running from what?" "From loneliness." He exhaled slowly. "From facing the emptiness when everything goes quiet." For a moment, Hannah couldn't speak. His words pierced her because they mirrored her own truth. The silence in her apartment, the endless nights lit only by her laptop, the void she tried to fill with deadlines and cases it all fit. The tears returned, but she didn't try to stop them this time. Daniel didn't reach out to wipe them away or tell her to stop crying. He just sat with her, steady and present, giving her the space to fall apart. No cliches, no forced comfort, just presence. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "I don't know who I am without all this, without the constant fight, without proving I'm enough every second." Daniel looked at her, his gaze steady and warm. "You're so much more than your work, Hannah. And so much more than the shadow of a relationship that never gave you what you deserved." She bit her lip, fighting a sob. "So what do I do now? Now you breathe." His answer was simple, but it carried weight. "You breathe, and you allow yourself to feel. The rest we figure out later." She stared at him, and in that moment something shifted inside her. There was no judgment in his eyes, no demands, just truth. For the first time in years, she felt seen, truly seen. The silence that followed was no longer heavy. It was comforting, a space where she didn't have to pretend. When she finally rose from the bench, Daniel walked her back toward the resort lobby. "Before partying," he said softly, almost blending into the night breeze, "no matter what happens in court, outside of it, I just want you to know you're not alone." Hannah froze for a moment, her heart pounding. She wanted to reply, but the words wouldn't come. All she could do was nod slightly and step into the elevator, carrying with her the strange, unshakable feeling that maybe for the first time there was a different path ahead of her. And as the doors closed, one question echoed in her mind: was she ready to take it? The wedding day dawned with sunlight gleaming off the calm sea. For the guests, everything looked perfect. White chairs aligned in rows, flowers decorating the altar with flawless precision, and the anticipation of seeing the bride walk down the aisle. For Hannah, though, the morning carried the weight of a storm she could no longer escape. She had spent hours in front of the mirror, telling herself to focus only on Becca and Rob's big day. But no amount of makeup could hide the shadows beneath her eyes or the turmoil within her heart. Ethan had tried to make amends. Earlier that morning, he knocked on her door, holding a bouquet of flowers. "I messed up," he said, his voice soft, rehearsed. "But I love you, Hannah. I just didn't know how to show it." She barely opened the door, meeting his eyes with quiet exhaustion. "Loving isn't hiding, Ethan. Loving isn't keeping me in the shadows to protect your image." He tightened his grip on the bouquet. "I was scared. Scared of what my father would say. Scared of what the partners would think. but I want to change. You're the woman I want beside me." For a fleeting moment, Hannah felt the echo of who she used to be, the woman who believed every promise he made. But then Daniel's words from the night before came rushing back. "You haven't lost. You freed yourself." And with them, the memory of his steady presence, of being allowed to simply breathe. "It's not that simple, Ethan." She closed the door gently, leaving him in the hallway. Not anymore. The ceremony went on as planned. Hannah, in a pale blue dress, walked the aisle as one of the bridesmaids. By coincidence or perhaps fate, she was paired once again with Daniel. Their hands brushed as they stepped in rhythm, and though neither spoke, the silence between them carried more weight than words. Becca glowed with joy as she exchanged vows with Rob. The guests laughed, cried, applauded. Hannah smiled too, but inside, her heart trembled. Watching Becca vow love and commitment only reminded her of the hollow promises she had clung to for so long. The reception began in a swirl of music and dancing. Couples twirled under golden lights, champagne glasses clinked, and the air filled with celebration. Hannah sat at the edge of the hall, watching, her chest heavy. Ethan, as always, was more occupied with networking and phone calls than with her. Eventually, he found her. His expression was hard, his voice sharp as he grabbed her arm. "We need to talk." "Not here." Hannah tried to pull away. "Here. Now." He dragged her toward the garden, away from the music and laughter. "You can't just throw away everything we've built." She yanked her arm free, her voice steady despite the tremor inside her. "Everything we've built. Ethan, what exactly do we have? Secrets? Excuses? You couldn't even acknowledge me in public, but you had no problem flirting with someone else right in front of me." His jaw tightened, anger flashing in his eyes. "I did it for you. To protect your reputation." "No, Ethan." Her tone cut through the night like glass. "You did it for yourself. To avoid facing the consequences of choosing someone who didn't fit neatly into your perfect world." He stepped closer, his face twisted with frustration. "Don't be dramatic. You'll regret this." "Maybe I will." Hannah lifted her chin, her voice firm. "But I'd rather regret choosing myself than keep losing who I am for you." At that moment, another voice entered the garden. "Is everything all right here?" Daniel. He had followed at a distance, wary of the rising tension. His calm but unwavering presence was enough to make Ethan drop her arm. "It's fine," Ethan snapped. "This has nothing to do with you." Daniel didn't flinch. "Maybe not, but it does when respect is missing." Hannah's chest tightened. With Daniel there, she felt strength she hadn't known she still had. She turned back to Ethan, her decision crystallizing. "It's over, Ethan." Her voice didn't waver. "I'm done hiding, done waiting, done sacrificing myself for something that was never real." For a second, Ethan just stared at her, stunned. Then his face hardened. "You'll regret this." She shook her head. "No, I'll regret not doing it sooner." Ethan stormed off, his footsteps echoing angrily against the stone path, leaving Hannah and Daniel alone under the glow of the garden lanterns. Her hands trembled, tears sliding down her face, but this time, they weren't tears of humiliation. They were tears of release, of freedom. Daniel took a cautious step forward. "Are you okay?" She wiped her face quickly, nodding. For the first time in a long while, "Yes." He extended his hand gently. Hannah hesitated, her heart racing. But as her fingers brushed his, warmth spread through her chest. The world seemed to still, the air thick with something fragile, yet powerful. She let him draw her closer, and under the soft glow of the lights, their lips met. The kiss was not rushed. It was steady, full of all the pain, hope, and unspoken truths they both carried. When they finally pulled apart, Hannah rested her forehead against his. "I don't know what happens now. We don't need to know." His voice was low, certain. "One day at a time. That's enough." In that moment, Hannah realized her choice wasn't just between two men. It was between the life she had been trapped in and the life she was finally ready to claim. And for the first time in years, she chose herself. And choosing herself made room for something she had never thought possible. A love that didn't demand her silence, but celebrated her voice. Months had passed since the wedding. The stifling heat of that weekend felt like a distant memory now, like a turbulent dream that no longer hurt in the same way. Hannah walked down the street with confident steps, a warm coffee in hand, and her gaze lifted toward the horizon. The courtroom was still part of her life, but it no longer consumed her. After the confrontation with Ethan and the whirlwind of revelations that followed, Hannah made a decision she once thought impossible. She left the firm where she had spent years wearing herself thin. It wasn't easy. She was terrified, cried, doubted herself. But when she handed in her resignation, she felt an immense weight lift from her shoulders. Now she worked at a small community office, taking on cases that truly mattered to her. Families in search of justice, ordinary people who had no resources to defend themselves. There was no glamour, no extravagant salaries, but there was purpose. And that was what she had always longed for without realizing it. Sarah, of course, remained at her side, as constant as ever. One morning, she barged into the office with a sly grin. "You look different, you know that." Lighter. She scanned Hannah from head to toe, as though trying to decode what had changed. "I think you finally figured out that there's life beyond the office." Hannah laughed, shuffling papers on her desk. "Maybe I figured out there's life, period." But the greatest change wasn't in her career, it was in her heart. Daniel had kept his word. After that intense night in the garden, he hadn't rushed her, hadn't demanded anything. He simply stayed present. Sometimes it was a short message, "How was your day?" Other times, casual coffee meets or quiet walks in the park. He gave her space, letting her rebuild herself. And that, more than anything, was new to her. Gradually, trust began to bloom. Not because he made grand promises, but because in every gesture, in every word, he was consistent. Daniel didn't talk to impress. He showed, in small ways, that he was there. One afternoon, as they wandered through an old bookstore, Hannah realized she couldn't remember the last time she had felt so at ease with someone. She could laugh at simple things, confess her deepest fears, or sit in silence and still feel understood. "Have you noticed?" Daniel asked, flipping through a book, a half smile on his lips. "Noticed what?" She looked up, curious. "That you don't look at the ground anymore when you walk." He closed the book and met her eyes, his gaze warm. "You walk with your head held high, like someone who knows exactly who she is." His words struck her deeply. For years, Hannah had lived in the shadows, molding herself to fit others' expectations. Now, she was beginning to recognize herself again. One evening, sitting on the edge of her bed, she pulled out an old journal she had kept hidden since law school. She flipped through the pages filled with dreams she had abandoned. To be a lawyer who makes a difference. To have someone who sees me for who I am, not for what I can give. A soft smile spread across her lips. Perhaps, at last, she was on the right path. Life found its rhythm again. There were still difficult days, of course, but they no longer crushed her. When fear returned, she remembered that night in the garden, Daniel's words echoing, "Breathe and allow yourself to feel." And so she did. She breathed, she felt, she lived. That weekend, they met again, not in a luxurious resort but in a modest neighborhood cafe. Wooden tables worn from use, simple flowers in glass jars. Daniel's favorite place. Strange how life turns around, Hannah mused, stirring her cup absent-mindedly. A few months ago, I thought my future depended on a title, on my name engraved on a brass plaque. Now, I just want to live like this, one day at a time. Daniel smiled, taking her hand across the table. And that's all we need. They sat in silence for a moment, just looking at each other. No grand declarations were needed. What they had was stronger than words. The quiet certainty that, despite all the pain, they had found something true. When they left the cafe, the night air wrapped around them. Daniel pulled her gently close, and in the middle of the busy sidewalk, he began to dance with her, to the faint sound of music, drifting from a nearby bar. Hannah laughed, startled, but soon surrendered to it. The city lights reflected in his eyes, and for the first time in a long time, Hannah felt she was exactly where she was meant to be. It wasn't a perfect new beginning, but it was real. And for her, that was more than enough. Every story has a turning point. For Hannah, it didn't happen in a courtroom, nor in some grand moment of professional triumph. It came in the silence of long nights, in tears shed under the lanterns of a garden, and in the instant she chose not to live for other people's expectations anymore. She discovered, painfully, that love isn't about diminishing yourself to fit into someone else's life. And she also discovered that you don't have to win every battle to finally feel free. It was enough to choose herself, for the very first time. How many times do we do the same? How many times do we cling to relationships that only shrink us, or to routines that drain us, believing that if we just hold on a little longer, things will change? But the truth is, sometimes change doesn't come from outside. It begins within us, the moment we whisper to ourselves, enough. Hannah didn't just find new love in Daniel. She found a new way to see herself. He didn't save her because she didn't need saving. What he did was simply be there, when she finally decided to rise. And maybe that's what really matters. People who walk beside us, without trying to mold us, reminding us instead of who we are. Life isn't a perfect script, filled with certainties. It's built on unexpected encounters, on falls and on beginnings again. And true love, whether for someone else or for ourselves, is born when we dare to let go of what no longer serves us. If you followed this story all the way to the end, remember, maybe you too are holding on to something you need to release. Maybe it's time to choose yourself, even if that means starting over. Because beginnings aren't signs of failure. They're proof of courage. And if this story touched you, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for staying with me until the end. Here at Lasting Tales, every narrative is more than entertainment. It's a mirror where we can see our own struggles, pains, and hopes reflected. Before you go, I ask for one small gesture that makes all the difference. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell so you don't miss the next stories, and share it with someone who may need this message today. I'd also love for you to leave your comment. Have you ever lived through a moment where you had to choose yourself? Your story may inspire and strengthen many others who are going through the same battle. And don't leave just yet, there are many more stories waiting for you here on the channel. Tales of love, of resilience, of discovery narratives that may touch your soul and remind you of what truly matters. Because, in the end, that's what we seek. Stories that leave marks time cannot erase. Here at Lasting Tales, every story is a reminder that it's never too late to begin again. We'll see you in the next one.